My fiancé laughed and said, "You're too safe? I want something exciting." I smiled and replied, "Then you should follow that feeling." I stepped aside without resistance, focused on my own future, and eventually she learned stability isn't easy to replace. "You're too safe." She said it the way someone describes furniture they're bored of. Not cruel exactly, just flat. Like she was reading a grocery list out loud and my name happened to be on it. I was standing in our kitchen at the time, holding 2 mugs of coffee the way I did every single morning, the way I had done for almost 3 years running. Her mug had the little chip on the handle that she never let me replace because she said it had character. I remember thinking about that chip in the split second after she said it. I remember thinking, she called this mug full of character, but she just called me safe. I set both mugs down on the counter. I didn't slam them. I didn't make a show of it. I just placed them down quietly and looked at her, and I said, "What does that mean?" She laughed. Not a mean laugh, almost a sad one. Like I'd just proven her point by asking the question too calmly. "It means exactly what it sounds like," she said, pulling her hair back and tying it up like she was getting ready for a different conversation entirely. "It means I know exactly what tomorrow looks like with you, and the day after, and the day after that. And that's a bad thing," I said. "It's not bad," she replied. "It's just suffocating." I stood there for a moment. And here's the thing I never admitted to anyone until much later. I wasn't shocked. I was quiet because I recognized the words. I had heard them before, in a different tone, in small pieces scattered across the last several months, wrapped up inside other conversations that I had chosen to interpret generously. I had been choosing to believe the generous version of things for a while by that point. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. We were 29, engaged for 8 months, together for a little over 3 years before that. We lived in a rented apartment in a mid-sized city, the kind of city that isn't glamorous enough to brag about, but comfortable enough that people stay longer than they planned. I worked in project management for a mid-level tech firm. I was good at my job, got consistent raises, had a reputation for being someone who delivered without chaos. She worked in marketing, freelance mostly, picking up clients the way people pick up interesting rocks on a beach, enthusiastically at first, then not always sure what to do with them afterward. We had met through mutual friends at a birthday party where neither of us had particularly wanted to be. I always thought that was a good sign, that we found each other in a place we both almost skipped. I thought it said something. I guess I was reading the story the way I wanted it to go. And looking back now, I can identify the moments I quietly chose to reframe rather than face. There was a version of the last year of our relationship that I had been editing in real time, choosing the generous interpretation, filing the uncomfortable details somewhere I told myself I'd revisit later, assuring myself that what I was observing were just seasons, just fluctuations, just the natural weather of a long relationship going through an adjustment. There was a night about 8 months before that kitchen conversation where she came home from a work event charged with something I could not name. She was animated in a way that hadn't been pointed at me in a long while. She talked about a new creative contact she had made, someone full of ideas, someone whose perspective on the industry was completely different from anyone she'd met. I asked what his name was. She said Qley, and moved on too quickly. I filed it. There was an afternoon about 3 months before the end when she asked me, seemingly out of nowhere, what I thought about couples who needed more independence from each other. I gave a thoughtful and measured answer about healthy autonomy in relationships. She nodded and said, "Yeah, exactly," and changed the subject. I filed that too. There was a pattern of her phone face down that had started at some point and silently become normal before I properly clocked the shift. There were evenings where she seemed to be somewhere else entirely while physically present. Not sad, not angry, just absent, like a radio station that had moved frequencies without announcing the change. I noticed all of it. I am not someone who misses things. I just kept choosing to believe that what I was noticing was temporary, navigable, something that could be addressed when the timing felt right. I kept waiting for the right moment, and then the moment chose me instead. "So what are you saying?" I asked her that morning. She leaned against the refrigerator and crossed her arms, not defensively, more like she was bracing herself, or maybe bracing me. "I've been feeling this way for a while," she said. "Feeling what way exactly?" "Like I'm watching my life happen in slow motion," she said. "Like everything is predictable and managed and smooth. And I want to feel something that surprises me." I picked up my coffee. I took a sip. I said, "And you're telling me this now?" I've been trying to figure out how to tell you for months, she said. Figure it out or avoid it. I asked. She didn't answer that, which was, in its own way, an answer. Is there someone else? I asked. She hesitated. That half-second hesitation that people do when they're deciding whether to say the gentle version or the honest version. I've been spending time with someone, she said. Someone who makes things feel less predictable. I nodded slowly. Not because I was okay with it, but because my brain was doing what it always does when information arrives that it hasn't fully processed yet. It catalogs. It organizes. It looks for the logic. And this person, I said, does he know about me? She looked at the floor briefly. He knows you exist, she said. That's not what I asked. She didn't respond right away. And in that silence, something shifted in me. Not dramatically, not with fire or fury, just quietly and permanently, like a door closing in a very old house. His name was Qley. I found out later, not from her, from a mutual friend who felt guilty keeping it. That Qley was the kind of person who described himself as a free spirit on social media, which is a phrase that always makes me curious what someone is actually trying to say. He did something in the creative space, photography or videography. She wasn't entirely clear on the specifics, and honestly I got the sense he wasn't entirely clear on them either. He rode a motorcycle, which apparently came up in conversation more than once. He had tattoos and a habit of making last-minute plans and a way of talking about life that made ordinary things sound like the kind of adventures that only the truly brave have access to. He was, by all accounts, interesting in the way that people are interesting before you have to depend on them. I'm not telling you this to dismiss him. I'm telling you this because I spent a lot of time later understanding what I was actually being compared to. Because when Vivian said I was too safe, she wasn't criticizing my character. She was criticizing the fact that I didn't create suspense. She was criticizing me for being someone she could count on. And there's a particular irony in that. The fact that the very thing she had leaned on for 3 years, the thing that had made her feel secure enough to explore her ambitions and take professional risks and know someone was always in her corner, that thing had eventually started to feel like a ceiling instead of a floor. I've thought about that a lot. About how safety can look different depending on where you're standing. From the outside, from a distance, from somewhere new and untested, safety looks like limitation. From inside a storm, from a hard Tuesday, from a moment when everything is going sideways, safety looks like exactly what it always was. The thing that holds. And at 29, standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, I wasn't entirely sure how to argue against her current vantage point. So what do you want to do? I asked her. She looked up at me with this expression I can only describe as cautious hope, like she expected me to explode and was already relieved that I hadn't. I think I need some space to figure things out, she said. And here's where something happened that I still think about. Because I had a choice in that moment. I could have fought. I could have said every true and valid thing that came to mind, and there were many. I could have reminded her about the night I drove 4 hours in terrible weather because she called me from a work event in tears and needed someone. I could have brought up the time she went through a dark stretch of anxiety and I stayed up night after night just being present, not trying to fix anything, just being there because that's what she needed. I could have listed the ways I had shown up, consistently and without fanfare, because that's what you do when you love someone. I could have made my case. But I looked at her and something told me, very clearly, very quietly, that making a case wasn't going to change the conclusion she'd already reached. She didn't need convincing. She needed permission. And I was not going to beg someone to choose me who had already decided that choosing me wasn't exciting enough. I remember the exact thought I had. I remember thinking, I am not a consolation prize. And I am not going to perform for someone who has already decided the show isn't worth watching. So I said the thing that I don't think she expected. I said, then you should follow that feeling. She blinked. What? If you feel suffocated, I said, and someone else makes you feel alive, then you should go find out what that is. She stared at me. I'm not going to chase you, I said. I'm not going to argue you into staying. I don't, she started, then stopped. I don't want you to give me up like I'm nothing, she said, and her voice cracked slightly at the edges. I looked at her for a long moment. I'm not giving you up like you're nothing, I said. I'm respecting that you already made a decision and choosing not to humiliate myself by pretending you didn't. She opened her mouth, closed it. This is not what I expected, she said quietly. What did you expect? I asked. She shrugged, a small uncomfortable motion. I thought you'd fight for us, she said. And I want to be honest about this part, because this is the part that stings the most when I think back on it. Not the part about Cole. Not the part about being called safe. This part. The part where she admitted she was counting on me to chase her. Like my desperation would be the proof of love she needed. Like if I didn't fight back, I didn't care enough. And I remember thinking, that's not how love works. That's not love. That's leverage. I fought for us every day for 3 years, I said. I showed up. Quietly, consistently, without drama. But I won't perform desperation to make you feel wanted. If the only version of love that's exciting to you is the one where I'm falling apart, then I'm not the right person for you. She started crying. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way people cry when they realize something and don't have any defenses left against it. I handed her a tissue. Old habit. And then I went to the bedroom and started thinking about logistics. I want to be clear about something. I was not okay. I was absolutely not okay in those first few weeks. I want to tell you that I walked away with my head high and my heart intact and my spirit unbothered, but that's not what happened. What happened is I found a short-term rental apartment across town, moved my things out over the course of a weekend, and then sat in my new mostly empty living room on a Sunday evening eating a bowl of cereal because I hadn't bought groceries yet, and I felt the weight of 3 years settle on me all at once. I thought about the chip in that coffee mug. I thought about the way she used to laugh at her own jokes before they were finished. I thought about the version of the future I had been building in my head, the house we had talked about, the traveling we said we'd do, the whole architecture of a shared life that I now needed to quietly demolish. I thought about the engagement ring that was still on her finger the last time I saw her, and I wondered when she'd take it off, and I felt something hollow open up in my chest. I was not okay. But here is the difference between this moment and other hard moments I'd been through before. This time, I didn't negotiate with the pain. I didn't try to talk myself out of it. I didn't call her. I didn't show up at the apartment with some grand gesture. I sat in my mostly empty room, and I let the feeling be exactly as heavy as it was. And then, the next morning, I got up and went to work. The first week in the new apartment was the hardest, honestly. Not because I was falling apart in any dramatic, visible way, but because of the silence. Our apartment had always had a background of her. Music she put on while she worked, the sound of her getting ready in the morning, the familiar rhythm of another person occupying the same space and making it feel occupied. The new place had none of that. It had my footsteps and the refrigerator hum and whatever was playing from the apartment above me. It had the particular quality of quiet that means you are genuinely alone. I had forgotten what that felt like. Not the concept of it, the actual texture of it. I found myself turning on the TV not to watch anything, but just to have voices in the room, which felt like something I should probably not do for too long. I gave myself 2 weeks of that, and then I stopped. I woke up on the 15th morning in the new apartment and made coffee without turning on anything. And I sat in that silence and I did not fight it. I let it just be what it was, a new condition, a new starting point, not a punishment. And somewhere in that stillness, I found something I hadn't expected, a kind of strange, spacious clarity. The particular peace of a person who has nothing left to manage except their own life. And then, the next morning, I got up and went to work. My colleague Derek found out through the grapevine about 2 weeks after I moved out. He showed up at my desk one afternoon with a look on his face like someone had told him there'd been a natural disaster. "Hey," he said carefully. "Hey," I said. "I heard about Vivian," he said. "I'm really sorry, man." "It is what it is," I said. He sat on the edge of my desk the way he did when he wanted to have a real conversation versus a fake one. "You okay?" he asked. I thought about it genuinely, the way you do when someone asks something and actually means it. "Not yet," I said, "but I'm going to be." He nodded. "Is she?" he started. "I don't want to talk about her," I said. "I want to talk about the Mercer project proposal I've been sitting on for 6 months because I kept telling myself I'd get to it when things settled down." Derek looked at me for a second. "Things settled down?" I said. "In the worst way possible, but they did. Might as well use it." And that's what I did. I know that sounds too clean. I know it sounds like I'm packaging something messy into something tidy for the sake of a good ending. But I'm telling you the honest version of what happened. The honest version is, I threw myself into work. Not in the avoidance sense, not in the burying the feeling sense, in the genuinely redirecting energy sense. Because the thing about building a future with someone is that you pour a significant amount of your bandwidth into that project. You think about their needs alongside yours. You make plans with their preferences factored in. You hold yourself back from certain decisions because you're waiting to make them together. And when that project ends, no matter how painfully it ends, all that bandwidth suddenly has nowhere to go. I chose to point it somewhere useful. I worked on the Mercer proposal. I started going to the gym at 6 in the morning, not because I wanted to transform my body, but because I needed something physical and structured to anchor the start of my day. I called my brother Aaron for the first time in months. We had drifted, the way siblings do when life gets comfortable and busy in its own separate directions, and we started talking again, just regularly, just about nothing specific and everything real. I read books I had bought and never opened. I went to a neighborhood spot by myself on a Friday night, which I had never done before, and it was uncomfortable for about 15 minutes, and then it was fine, and then it was actually kind of good. I was building something. I didn't know what exactly, but I was building. About 5 weeks after I moved out, Vivian texted me. Nothing dramatic. Just, can we talk sometime? I sat with my phone for a while, and I thought about what I wanted. Not what she needed, not what would make things less awkward, not what would make me appear mature or evolved or unbothered. What I actually wanted. And honestly, I didn't want to talk. Not yet. Not because I was punishing her. I want to be clear about that. I was not interested in punishing her. I was not interested in making her feel bad for a choice she made that she had every right to make. But I also knew myself well enough to know that hearing her voice at that point would set me back. That I would walk away from that conversation in the wrong direction, either angrier than before or softer than I could afford to be. I wrote back, not ready for that yet. I hope you're doing well, She replied with, okay. I understand, and then nothing for a while. I read that reply several times, not looking for hidden meaning, just sitting with it. There was something in those 2 words that felt more grown-up than a lot of the conversations we'd had recently. I understand. Maybe she did. Maybe that was the version of her that had always been able to hear hard things clearly, the version I had loved, the version that had made 3 years feel like the beginning of something permanent. Or maybe she just had nothing else to say. Either way, I put the phone down and did not pick it back up again that night. Progress is its own kind of quiet victory. The Mercer proposal went through. I'm not going to make a bigger deal of it than it was. It wasn't a life-changing victory. It was a project proposal for a new client workflow system that I had been overthinking for too long. But Derek pulled me aside after the meeting where it got approved and said, "That was the best work you've done in 2 years." I thought about what had changed. The answer was actually simple. I had stopped holding back. Not in an aggressive way, not in a reckless way. I had just stopped the quiet background negotiation I had been running for a long time. The one where part of my brain was always running a parallel track devoted to someone else's stability and happiness. When that track went quiet, everything else got louder. I got a small raise at the end of that quarter. Not enough to change my life, but enough to confirm the direction. I started looking into a certification program I'd been interested in for 2 years, a program in systems architecture that I had always told myself I'd look into when things were less busy. Things were different now. Not less busy. Different. I enrolled. I also started doing something I hadn't done in years. I started saying yes to things. Not in the reckless, filling the void sense. In the quieter, more intentional sense. The sense of someone who had been holding back from a lot of small things in the service of a plan that had now dissolved, and who was reassessing what it actually meant to live their life. Aaron called one night and asked if I wanted to come to some dinner party the following weekend. Some urban planning types, couple of guys from the office, it'll be decent food at least, he said. Old version of me might have hesitated. Old version of me might have said, let me check, let me see, let me get back to you. Instead I said, yeah, I'm in. And I showed up. And that was where I met Zoe. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 months after the breakup, I ran into Vivian. Not by accident exactly. The city isn't that big, and we had overlapping orbits, mutual friends and familiar neighborhoods. She was at a gallery opening that a mutual friend had invited us both to, independently, without knowing we'd both say yes. I saw her before she saw me. She was standing near a large canvas piece on the far wall, holding a glass of wine, wearing a green dress I had never seen before. She looked good. I want to say that honestly, because some versions of this story would demand that she looked terrible, like the universe was confirming my choices by making her appear diminished. But that's not what happened. She looked like herself, which was beautiful and familiar, and here's the part that surprised me, less destabilizing than I expected. I had told myself I wasn't ready, but standing across that gallery, I found that the sight of her just made me feel a quiet sadness, the kind you carry for things that were real and are now over. Not devastation, not longing, just the weight of something that mattered. She spotted me about 10 minutes later. She made her way over carefully, like she was approaching something she wasn't sure was safe. Hi, she said. Hey, I said. You look well, she said. Thanks, I said. You too. There was a pause, the kind that has too many things inside it to fill with casual conversation. How are you doing, actually, she asked. Genuinely well, I said, and I meant it. She studied my face for a moment, looking for the polite version versus the real one. I'm glad, she said. And then, quietly, I miss you, you know. I looked at her. Not in the way that, she stopped. I just miss the person you were to me. The safe one, I said, and I said it without edge, without bitterness. Just as a fact. She winced. I said that terribly, she said. Yes, I said. You did. I didn't mean. I know what you meant, I said. I understood it even then. I just wasn't going to let it change who I was to make myself more interesting to you. She nodded, and the conversation drifted after that, into lighter territory, mutual friends, and the art on the walls, and the wine that was either excellent or free, hard to tell which. And when we parted, I felt clear. That was the word. Clear. I heard things through the grapevine over the following weeks. I wasn't seeking information. People just talk, especially mutual friends who care about both people and assume that checking in on one means sharing updates about the other. I heard that Cole and Vivian had taken a trip together that ended badly. Something about plans falling apart mid-journey, about a version of spontaneity that turned out to mean no contingency, no backup, no safety net, and the realization that when something goes wrong, charm is not a replacement for capability. I heard that the excitement she had been chasing had started to come with complications she hadn't fully factored in, the kind of complications that predictability is specifically designed to prevent. I heard that a freelance gig she had been counting on fell through, and that the person she had been leaning on for support had not shown up in the way she needed. Not because he didn't care, necessarily, but because showing up consistently for someone else requires a kind of discipline that excitement seekers often haven't developed. Excitement is self-directed. Stability is relational. They are genuinely different things, and you only discover that fully when you need the second one and only have access to the first. I heard she had cried on the phone to a mutual friend, and the mutual friend had said something like, "You should call him," meaning me. And Vivian had gone quiet for a long time before saying she wasn't sure she had the right to. I didn't gloat. I want to be specific about that. I did not feel satisfaction at the news of her difficulties. What I felt was something quieter and more honest. A recognition, maybe. A recognition that what I had been offering for 3 years was something real, something of actual value, something that does not get replaced easily or quickly or without cost. And she had called it suffocating. It was a Saturday morning in late October, about 4 months after the breakup, when she called me properly for the first time. Not a text, an actual call. I stared at the screen for a moment and then picked up. Hey, I said. Hi, she said. Her voice was tired in a way I recognized. The specific tiredness of someone who has been carrying something difficult for too long without the right support. Is this a good time? She asked. What's going on? I said. And she talked. For a long time, she just talked. She talked about how things with Cole had unraveled and why, and I won't detail the specifics because they aren't mine to share, and also because the specifics don't really matter. What matters is what sat underneath the specifics. She talked about how the excitement she had been chasing turned out to require something from her that she hadn't expected, a certain kind of emotional labor, a certain kind of management, a constant calibration of energy just to keep things from going sideways. It's exhausting, she said. Being surprised all the time. I said, not sarcastically, genuinely. Yeah, she said. That's actually exactly it. Surprise is exhausting when it's constant. There was a pause. I keep thinking about something you said that morning, she said. Which part? I said. The part about fighting for us every day without making noise about it, she said. About showing up quietly. I didn't say anything. I think I confused stability for stagnation, she said. I think I thought predictability meant you'd stop trying. But you hadn't, she said. You were just consistent. And I didn't know how to read that. I sat with that for a while. It was a generous and honest thing to say. It cost her something to say it. I wasn't going to minimize it. I appreciate you saying that, I said. It means something. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Do you hate me? And I thought about it. Not the polite version of the answer. The real one. No, I said. I'm not there. I was hurt, I said. Genuinely, properly hurt. But I don't hate you. You wanted something I wasn't giving you, or at least wasn't giving you in a way you could feel. I think we wanted different things from a relationship, and I think you needed to go find that out. Even if the way it happened was painful. She was quiet for a moment. "You're so," she started. "Don't say calm," I said. She laughed. It was the first time I had heard her laugh in months, and it landed somewhere real. "I was going to say frustratingly kind," she said. "I don't know if that's worse," I said. She laughed again. And then the conversation got easier. The way conversations do sometimes when the hard part has been said and there's nothing left to protect. But here's what I didn't tell her on that call. Here's the part that lived inside me while we were talking. I had met someone. Not recently, not dramatically, not in the way people meet someone in movies where it announces itself with orchestral swells. I had met someone the way things happen when you're actually living your life instead of just managing it. Her name was Zoe. She worked in urban planning, of all things, and I had met her through Aaron when he dragged me to a dinner party at a friend's house in September. She was sitting across from me at a long table, and we ended up talking for 3 hours about everything except what we did for work, which was a first for me, and somehow the most interesting conversation I'd had in years. She had this way of asking questions that made you feel like your answer actually mattered, not in a flattering, performing way, in a genuinely curious way. Like she was collecting information about the world and thought your specific perspective might contain something valuable. I liked her immediately. Not the lightning bolt kind of liking, the slow burn kind. The kind where you realize 4 days after meeting someone that you've been thinking about something they said, and you're not entirely sure when it started. We had exchanged numbers at the end of that dinner, and the texting had been easy in the way things are easy when neither person is pretending. By October, we had seen each other 3 times, and none of those times had felt like a performance. I wasn't telling Vivian this because it felt dishonest to bring it up in that context, but it mattered to the full picture. Because part of what had allowed me to sit in that conversation with clarity, without desperation, without wanting to reach for something that had already ended, was that I wasn't empty. I had been filling myself back up, piece by piece. With work, with my brother, with books and early mornings, and a gym routine that had become something I actually looked forward to. And now with the slow, careful, genuinely good experience of someone new who seemed to see me clearly and not find it boring. I want to tell you about a specific conversation Zoe and I had, because I think it matters to the story. It was a Sunday afternoon in November, and we were walking through a park near her apartment, the kind of cold that makes everything sharp and clean. She asked me what had happened with my previous relationship. Not prying. She had mentioned an ex of her own in passing, and it was just the natural territory of 2 people getting to know each other. I told her the broad strokes. 3 years, engagement, the morning in the kitchen, the word she used. Zoe was quiet for a moment. "How did you feel when she said that?" she asked. "In the moment?" I said. "Yeah." I thought about it. Like I was being told that caring about someone consistently was a character flaw. I said. Zoe looked at me. "That's a terrible thing to be told," she said. "It wasn't said with cruelty," I said. "But yeah, that's what it felt like underneath." Zoe was quiet for a few steps. "I think some people confuse intensity with love," she said. "They think if something is calm, it can also be real. Like the value of a feeling is determined by how much turbulence it produces." "Yeah," I said. "That's exactly it. Turbulence as a metric," I said. "Right," she said. "And stability is evidence of nothing happening." She shook her head. "Stability is what happens when you actually trust the person you're with," she said. "That's not boring. That's the whole point." I didn't say anything for a few steps. And then I said, "I'm really glad Aaron dragged me to that dinner." She smiled. "He talked about you for 20 minutes before you arrived," she said. "He said you were the most reliable person he'd ever met. He meant it as the highest compliment he knew how to give." And I thought, what an interesting thing to say about someone. "I wanted to meet you right away." I looked at her. "He said that?" I said. "He did," she said. "And here you are," I said. "Here I am," she said. Vivian and I spoke a few more times over the following months. Not regularly, occasionally. Mostly about practical things at first. The formal untangling of an engagement. The ring, which she returned. The few shared belongings. The lease on the apartment that expired naturally. And then, as those things resolved themselves, sometimes just to check in. I didn't hold on to bitterness. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't because I was especially noble or evolved. It was because bitterness requires ongoing investment. It requires you to keep the wound active, to keep visiting it, to keep measuring how much it still hurts. And I had made a decision in those early weeks, sitting in my mostly empty apartment with a bowl of cereal, a quiet, private decision that I never announced to anyone. I decided that what had happened was not going to become the central story of my life. It was going to be a chapter, an important one, A formative one that taught me things I needed to know. But a chapter, not the whole book. In February of the following year, almost 9 months after that morning in the kitchen, I got a final message from Vivian that I've thought about many times since. She sent it late on a Wednesday night, probably when she was in that state that late nights create, where your guard is lower and the things you've been carrying for months come closer to the surface. It said, "I think I owe you more than I've said. You were good to me, consistently, in ways I didn't know how to appreciate. I treated it like it was guaranteed. I didn't understand then that what you offered was actually something people look for their whole lives. I hope you know that I know that now. And I hope you found what you deserve, **. I sat with my phone for a long time. I didn't know what to write back. Not because I was angry, not because the message didn't mean something, but because I had reached a place where the things she was describing, the recognition, the acknowledgement, no longer felt urgent. I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I hadn't been waiting for them for months. I had already moved. I had already rebuilt. I had already arrived somewhere that felt real and steady and worth protecting. I wrote back simply, *, thank you for saying that. I mean it. Take care of yourself, *. And I put the phone down. And I looked around the apartment, better furnished now, warmer, the beginnings of a real space rather than an emergency landing pad. And I felt the particular quiet that comes not from nothing happening, but from being genuinely, solidly okay. I want to talk about something that I've never fully articulated to anyone, because I think it's the most important part of this whole story. Not the engagement ending, not walking away, not even what was built afterward, as real as all of that was. The most important part happened in the space of about 4 seconds in that kitchen. The 4 seconds between when she said, "You're too safe," and when I responded. Because in those 4 seconds, I felt the pull toward the version of me that would collapse. The version that would start listing credentials, start performing emotion, start begging in the subtle way that isn't called begging but functions identically. I felt the pull toward fear, the fear of losing her, the fear of starting over, the fear of being alone, the fear of being exactly what she said I was. Too safe, too quiet, not enough. I felt all of that, and I chose not to let it speak. Not because I didn't feel it, I felt every molecule of it, but because I looked at her in that moment and I understood something very clearly. If I had to perform panic to keep her, I would be performing panic for the rest of my life. If my reliability was the problem, then fixing the problem would require me to become unreliable. And I was not willing to do that. Not for anyone. Not for anything. Because who you are in the difficult moments, who you are when someone looks at your best quality and tells you it's a flaw, that's the actual you. And I had worked too long and too quietly to build something real to dismantle it, to look more exciting to someone who couldn't see it clearly. I chose myself. Quietly. Without announcement. Without applause. And I want to tell you something about that choice, because I think people hear it and imagine it as this clean, powerful, cinematic moment. It wasn't. It was terrifying. Standing in that kitchen, looking at the woman I had planned to spend my life with, making the quiet decision not to fall apart for her. That took more from me than anything I'd done before. Because the safe choice in that moment, ironically, was to collapse. The safe choice was to beg, to negotiate, to make her feel needed, to create the drama that would delay the ending. People do it all the time. They keep something alive through sheer force of conflict, because conflict at least feels like contact. And I understood the pull of it so completely. I understood it right down to the cellular level. I just refused it. Because deep underneath the fear, underneath the loss, underneath all of it, there was a version of me that understood exactly what I was worth. And that version was not going to perform desperation on a Tuesday morning in a kitchen that still smelled like fresh coffee. So I let it be exactly as hard as it was. And I said what I said. And I meant every word. And every good thing that came afterward. The work, the rebuild, the mornings before the rest of the world woke up, the slow, steady warmth of something new that felt nothing like performance. All of it grew from that one quiet choice. There's a version of this story where I tell you I was perfectly fine, where I stride out of that kitchen like someone who has it figured out and never looks back, and the healing is seamless and the future arrives fully formed. That version would be satisfying. It would be emotionally clean. It would also be a lie. The real version involves cereal for dinner. It involves lying awake at 2 a.m. doing the math on 3 years and coming up empty. It involves a moment in the gym, about 6 weeks out, where I was in the middle of a set, and something hit me sideways, and I had to stop and just sit with it because the weight of it arrived all at once with no warning. It involves the slightly too long pause before I answered when people asked if I was okay. It involves an evening where I almost texted her just because I'd had a good day and the first thing I wanted to do was tell her about it. And then I remembered, and I put the phone down, and I just sat with the strangeness of that. The real version is that I was not fine. And then, slowly, by the work of small daily choices, I became fine. And then better than fine. And then genuinely, structurally okay in a way that didn't require management or maintenance. Because that's how recovery actually works. Not in straight lines. Not in clean arcs. In accumulation. In the quiet, consistent, unspectacular work of showing up for yourself the same way you spent years showing up for someone else. I think about what she said sometimes, about stability not feeling exciting. And I think she was right about one thing. Stability does not feel exciting the way a wildfire feels exciting. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with wind and noise and the electric certainty that something is happening right now, something significant, something worth documenting. It just holds. It holds when things get hard. It holds when you're tired. It holds at 2 a.m. when you need someone to just be there. No drama, no agenda, no performance, just there. It holds in the ordinary, overlooked, unremarkable moments that make up the actual majority of a shared life. And here's what I've come to understand about those moments. They are not filler. They are not the parts between the exciting parts. They are the whole thing. The Tuesday mornings with coffee, the evenings with nothing to report, the presence of someone who knows where you keep things and how you take your tea and what kind of silence means you're okay versus the kind that means you're not. That is the whole thing. And some people figure that out while they still have it. And some people figure it out afterward. And some people never figure it out at all. But the ones who do, the ones who eventually understand what they were looking for when they were busy looking for something else, they carry a particular kind of knowledge. A knowledge that's not bitter and not superior. Just quiet and permanent. Like a door that has been closed in a very old house. I got promoted in March. The systems architecture certification I had enrolled in came through in April. By early summer, I was leading a division I had been working toward for years, a position that felt earned in a way that promotions don't always feel. It wasn't handed to me. I had built the case for it over months of work that was better than anything I had produced in the previous 2 years. Work that came from a version of me that was no longer splitting its energy, no longer quietly managing the background weight of something unraveling. Derek sent me a message the day it was announced that just said, "Called it." I appreciated that more than any formal congratulations. 2 words from someone who had watched the whole process unfold and understood exactly what it had cost said more than a paragraph from someone just ticking the politeness box. Some acknowledgments land because of their size. Others land because of their accuracy. Zoe and I made things official somewhere around February. Not with a proclamation, just with the understanding that neither of us was going anywhere and neither of us needed to pretend otherwise. She met Aaron at a birthday dinner in March, and they argued amiably about urban planning versus systems architecture for 45 minutes while I sat between them, eating quietly and thinking that this, exactly this, was what I had been building toward without knowing the blueprints. A life that felt like mine. Fully, actually, without negotiation. A life I hadn't held back from. A life where reliability wasn't a character flaw, but the foundation everything else stood on. And here's the quietest truth of all of it. I would not have arrived here if she hadn't said what she said that morning. Not because heartbreak is secretly a gift. I don't believe in narratives that tidy up pain by making it purposeful. But because that morning forced a reckoning. It forced me to stand in a kitchen and choose between performing who I wasn't or committing to who I was. And I chose. And that choice, that single quiet, terrifying, unspectacular choice, was the thing that everything else was built on. One evening in May, Zoe and I were sitting on the balcony of the apartment, nothing particularly significant happening, just the specific comfort of 2 people who have stopped needing to fill the silence. She was reading something, and I had a coffee, and the city was doing what cities do at dusk, that amber-lit hum of a day resolving into something softer. Out of nowhere she said, "You seem settled. Is that a good thing?" I said, without turning from the view. "It's the best thing," she said. I looked over at her. She was still looking at her book. "Someone told me once I was too safe," I said. She looked up at that. "What did you say?" she asked. "I told her to follow that feeling," I said. Zoe was quiet for a moment. "And did she?" "Yeah," I said. And she found out that safe isn't a flaw," I said. "It's just what something looks like when it's built to last." Zoe looked at me for a long beat. "That's a very good line," she said. I've had time to work on it, I said. She laughed, and I picked up my coffee. And the city kept humming. And nothing dramatic happened. And it was exactly right.